And let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so, yeah. So, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So, last time we left off here.
Did you record? I'm sorry, did you start to record?
I did.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes.
Last time you didn't. Okay.
On Bible class, I didn't record, but yeah. So we're on the top of page 119 in this PDF, which is, where is it? 21A in Baba Vatra. So we were talking about the Mishnah that said people share a courtyard. What individual residents around the courtyard are allowed to do in the space in the courtyard. You can't open a store in the courtyard, but you can do something in your own space. So we'll get to the idea of what kind of public, when things are open to the public. No, let me say it this way. When individual residents are, by doing what they're doing, encouraging the public to come in to the semi-private space, what is the limit of public in the semi-private space that all other residents are supposed to endure, and beyond which they're not supposed to endure and individual residents aren't allowed to do. So that's what the Mishnah gave an example or two. And then the Gemara talked about an example of a rabbi who instituted the idea of public education, public Jewish education, and that schools, so somebody is allowed to set up a school in their residence that then brings the public, or at least those students and their parents who are dropping them off maybe, into the courtyard. Okay, so we were talking about school. We talked about how old, like what age does education start? When does it stop? Things like that. Okay, so now we go on. This is where we left off, the top of 119 in the PDF. With regard to a courtyard, the Gemara concluded that it is permitted for one to establish an elementary school to teach Torah, and the neighbors cannot protest. The Gemara raises an objection to this ruling from a Baraita. So here's an objection from a source from the time of the Mishnah with regard to one member of a courtyard who wishes to become a doctor, a bloodletter, a weaver, or a teacher of children. The other members of the courtyard can prevent him from doing so. This indicates that neighbors can protest the teaching of children in their shared courtyard. Right? So in other words, we were just learning that you are allowed to teach children in the courtyard. So how does this source come along to say that you can't teach children in the courtyard? The Gemara answers with, what are we dealing here? That is, when can they protest as teaching children? We are dealing with a case of Gentile children, as there is no mitzvah to educate them. In this situation, the neighbors can protest about the noise. All right, so that's interesting, but let's look at the note first about that, Gentile children. The early commentaries write that the same halacha applies in the case of Jewish children who are being taught subjects other than Torah. So that's interesting too. Okay, so you're allowed to teach Torah or Mishnah or other Jewish subjects to Jewish children, but you're not allowed to teach math or a foreign language or any other kind of tutoring for the SATs or something like that in your courtyard to Jewish children. whereas this Baraita says you're not allowed to teach Gentile children. So it's just interesting to me in terms of, because in the Daf Yomi cycle, just last week or so, the pages from the tractate Avodah Zarah just finished, and it's that tractate is all about different elements of how to relate. Because we studied a little bit of Avodah Zarah ourselves a couple of years ago, all about different aspects of how to relate to Gentiles. And so there is, in the time of the rabbis, well, the time in the Mishnah, just have to remember that this is the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire are not exactly nice to the Jews. So that affects our relationship with Gentiles. If the Gentiles aren't nice to us, then that affects our understanding of how we're supposed to relate to them, and that we wouldn't be predisposed to be nice to the Gentiles just because of how the Roman Empire is treating us. But after centuries of living under Gentile rule, the rabbis understood that maybe this harsh anti-Gentile approach might not be wise, and that we're not really in a position, because the Jewish community has spread so far and wide in the Middle Ages, that you don't have large pockets of Jewish communities like there were in the time of the rabbis. You're spread thin, so you're more susceptible to attack by Gentile, and you're not really in a position to say, hey, we're going to maintain our own separate life. It just, the less Jews there are, the harder it is to maintain your own life apart from Gentiles. You end up needing to have relationships with them in order to survive. So that affects then just the reality of the situation affects our rabbinic halachic understanding of how to relate to them. So yeah, so it affects how much Gentile culture you're allowed to learn as a Jew, and that, you just look at the kinds of Jewish day schools that are around today. And like a couple of years ago, New York State tried to impose its will on yeshivas in New York to demand that unless the yeshivas teach the mandated minimum requirement of science and math and English, then the yeshivas won't get their funding from the state like any other private schools might get some funding from the state. And there was an uproar within the yeshiva world, because the whole point of yeshiva, ultra-Orthodox yeshiva education, is to separate yourself from the Gentile community. So, within our own community here, there's a lot of lateral movement in ninth grade from those students who are at the Hebrew Academy, who then move to the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School for education. And it's all about college prep. And that some parents at the Hebrew Academy feel that the college prep courses, that is, standard English, math, science classes that might help better educate and prepare students for college, that education would be better at the Charles E. Smith Day School than it is at the Hebrew Academy. So it's all about the understanding of what you expect your child to do in life, and what your priorities as a parent are related to Jewish values. And so those students who are at the yeshiva high school, the one for boys and the one for girls, yeah, some of them go to college, but a lot of them go to yeshiva university for college, where there is secular education there, but you don't have to necessarily have secular education at yeshiva university. You can major in other things. So it's all about just our attitude to our Jewish life and how much non-Jewish life and value and culture we're going to allow to infiltrate our lives. So it's just a whole fascinating thing, this whole topic of which is all about the idea of assimilation. How is integrating into the broader secular culture a good thing for Jews or a bad thing for Jews? And you can argue that, people can argue pro and con that question for a long time. Okay, yes.
Jonah,
Yes.
the bloodletting, is this, in my memory, it's the first time I've seen a reference to bloodletting. Is that?
No, we've had references to bloodletters before, but it's just interesting that it has doctor and bloodletter. So, like, a community that has a doctor, why would it have a bloodletter? Right? So I would imagine you have a bloodletter first, and then you realize or you learn some rudimentary medical science, and then you realize you don't need a bloodletter anymore. You go to the doctor. So, like, the doctor could prescribe medication, whereas the bloodletter does, like let's say you have a headache, you might go to a bloodletter to relieve the headache, or you go to a doctor to get some aspirin, right? So how do doctors and bloodletters exist in the same community? So I don't know enough about that. There is a halacha here, an H next to doctor, and so there's this down below here. If a resident of an alley or a courtyard wishes to become a doctor and see patients, or a bloodletter or a weaver whose wares customers come to see, or a teacher of Gentile children, or a teacher of subjects other than Torah, or a scribe who writes documents for the townspeople, right? So that, we're seeing a source now that's adding more job titles than what we have here. His neighbors can protest about the resulting traffic. Some commentaries write that residents of a courtyard can protest, but those of an alleyway cannot, unless there's already someone of the same profession in that alley. And then it's an issue of competition as opposed to traffic. Similarly, it's not permitted for one to rent his residence to someone who will use it for these occupations. That's okay. So it doesn't answer the question about bloodletters, but again, we've had bloodletters, we've come across bloodletters before, and I'm not sure how the bloodletting was done. Was it done with leeches, or was it done with needles? I don't know. And how much blood was let too? Right, just a little bit, depending on, is it from different parts of the body, depending on the ailment? I don't know. Okay, come in here, another baraita with regard to two people who are residing in one courtyard, and one of them sought to become a doctor, a bloodletter, a weaver, or a teacher of children. The other can prevent him from doing so. The Gemara answers, here too we're dealing with a case of Gentile children. So we're still trying to prove the point that you're allowed to teach children, and bringing up other sources that say you're not allowed to teach children, or you can be prevented from teaching children, and still saying, well, no, we're talking about Gentile children. The Gemara suggests, come in here, another baraita, one who has a house in a jointly owned courtyard may not rent it to a doctor, nor to a bloodletter, nor to a weaver, nor to a Jewish teacher, nor to a Gentile teacher. This indicates that one's neighbors can prevent him from teaching Jewish children. The Gemara answers with, what are we dealing with here? We are dealing with the scribe of the town who does not teach children but writes documents and letters for residents of the town. This type of work is not a mitzvah. And since many people seek his services, the residents of the courtyard can prevent him from performing this job near their houses. All right, go in the business district to be a sofer or these other things. Don't conduct your business in our town, in our courtyard. So, which it's just interesting, how is it that doctors and dentists are permitted to have their practice in their house? Because it means, well, it is a single family home, but I wonder if neighborhood associations can prevent businesses in the homes, and because of the traffic and the parking issues and things like that. Like, in other words, so I have a homeowners association for my neighborhood, the Hallowell neighborhood, which is a pretty strict homeowners association. And I wonder, like, if I were a doctor or a dentist and I wanted to have a dental practice in my home, whether I'd be allowed to do that. I'm not sure. And I don't think there are doctors and dentists in the Hallowell neighborhood. So I'm just saying, I'm just bringing that up, talking off the top of my head, just thinking about neighborhood associations and whether they can do that. So, okay. On to this red S, which is a different, now we're going back to a different topic. With regard to the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla, he's the one who said that schools should be set up. And concerning teaching children in general, Rava says, from the time of the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla that school teachers must be established in each town and onward, one does not bring a child from one town to another. Rather, each child is educated where he resides. So that's interesting too. It's like public school districts, right? You have to go to the public school where you live, and you'd have to pay extra if you wanted to go to a different public school than the one in your district, or move. But one does bring them from one synagogue where they learn to another synagogue. And if a river separates the areas, one does not bring the children across lest they fall into the river. And if there is a bridge spanning the river, one may bring them across the river. But if there is only a narrow bridge, one does not bring them. And there's a picture here of a bridge. Here's a log bridge going across a river. Now, I don't know how deep that river is, but that bridge doesn't look so sturdy. The two logs are together, and I guess, if you're used to going across the bridge, you can do that. But some, it could be dangerous, and you could fall in if you're not careful. And children tend not to be careful. So now the interesting thing is, so you shouldn't bring a child from one town to another for education because there's a school in every town. But you can go from one synagogue to another synagogue. I'm just interesting about that. What's the difference between one school and one synagogue and another? That you're allowed to go for synagogue, but not for school. And the river, I understand, is danger. So is it danger for the other things too? Or is each category its own special reason? So let's see if the Gemara comments on that. And Rava said the maximum number of students, just a second here, maximum number of students for one teacher of children is 25 children. And if there are 50 children in a single place, one establishes two teachers so that each one teaches 25 students. And if there are 40 children, one establishes an assistant, and the teacher receives help from the residents of the town to pay the salary of the assistant. So this is fascinating too. What's the appropriate classroom size? And, so I'm not sure what it is in Montgomery County for public schools. And I think different schools have different school sizes, classroom sizes. And I think the wealthier the county is, the more schools it can open to reduce class sizes, right, and hire more teachers. And the less wealthy counties have less schools and therefore bigger classroom size, which affects the quality of education too. In Israel, public schools, there are sometimes 40 kids to a class, which makes it nearly impossible to be able to teach effectively. Because there's a style of teaching today. I have a master's in Jewish education, but it's from 36 years ago. So there's a whole, I learn about certain things about education today and strategies, classroom management and stuff like that from whatever Lenore talks about from her day at school. And one issue today for teachers is differentiation. So teachers have to be able to be talented enough to understand that there are different learning levels in each classroom, and that teachers, to be effective teachers, need to be able to teach to the different levels and abilities in the classroom. So you can imagine it's a lot of work to be able to do that, and it requires skill and talent. And some teachers are able to do it, and some teachers can't. And that's where Lenore comes in at the school, because teachers can only differentiate so well, and then some students just can't be in the classroom and just need extra support. And that's what Lenore's job is, to provide that support, if she can, with specialized teachers for pull-out help and whatever like that. Anyway, all of that to understand that I'm not sure how much the rabbis knew about the different learning styles of kids, but they did know that when a class becomes unmanageable. And they thought 25 is the limit, which I think that's the limit at the Jewish day school, by the way. They try not to have more than 25 kids in their elementary school classrooms. So and that's how they determine how many kindergartens they're going to have based on enrollment. Okay. All right. And Rava said, if there is a teacher of children who teaches a few subjects, and there is another who teaches more subjects than him, one does not remove the first teacher from his position to hire the second, as perhaps the other teacher will come to be negligent due to the lack of competition. So let's just see what that note means. Become negligent. According to Rashi, the chosen educator will come to believe that he is so good that he need not make an effort, and he will become negligent. Others explain that if the first teacher is replaced, the new teacher will be negligent, as he will assume that he too will soon be replaced by a better teacher. Yet others suggest that the teacher who has been dismissed will be negligent, will forget his studies, and will no longer be able to teach. So it's unclear what the negligence is. Rav Dimi from Nehardea said, on the contrary, all the more so is it the case that he will teach in a better manner if he knows that he is the sole instructor in the place, as jealousy among teachers increases wisdom. The one who was dismissed will try to refine his skills so that he will be rehired, and this will prevent negligence on the part of the other teacher. Okay. And Rava said, if there are two teachers of children, one who teaches a lot of material but is not precise in his statements, and one who is precise but does not teach a lot of material. One hires the one who teaches a lot of material but is not precise. Why is this? Errors will be corrected by themselves and no lasting harm will be caused. Right, so this is interesting too. Are you teaching for the exam? Like, in other words, there's standardized state mandated tests, and that's always a debate within public schools whether teachers are supposed to teach for this test, because then the more kids who pass the test, then it shows up better on statewide assessments. The more schools that have students pass the test, then maybe more schools, those schools get better funding from the state or things like that. So are you supposed to teach to the test, or are you supposed to teach to the student and try to be thorough? By contrast, Rav Dimi of Nahardea said, one hires the instructor who is precise and does not teach a lot of material, as once an error is taught, it is taught and cannot be easily corrected. So just interesting to be learning here some educational strategies that Rava is sharing. The Gemara cites a proof for the opinion of Rav Dimi of Nahardea. This is as it is written. For Yoav and all Israel remained there 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. When Yoav came before King David after this episode, David said to him, what is the reason that you did that? Why did you kill only the males? Yoav said to him, as it is written, you shall blot out the males of Amalek, that is, the male descendants of Amalek, who descend from Edom. David said to him, but we read the verse as stating, you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek. In other words, are you blotting out the males of Amalek? Or are you blotting out all the memory of Amalek? So it's the same word, Zion, Kaf, Resh, but is it Zachor of Amalek? Zachar of Amalek, that is males, or is it Zecher, which means remembrance? Yoav said to him, I was taught to read it as Zachar. Yoav went and asked his childhood Bible teacher. Yoav said to him, how did you read this word to us? The teacher said to him, I read it as Zecher. The teacher had read it in the proper way, but he failed to notice that his student had learned it incorrectly. Right, and now you see the result of learning it incorrectly. He went and killed the males of Edom. So now, what does Yoav do to the teacher? Yoav took a sword to kill him. The teacher said to him, why do you want to kill me? Yoav said to him, as it is written, cursed is he who does the work of the Lord with a slack hand. And you taught me incorrectly. The teacher said to him, leave that man to remain as cursed. This is a sufficient punishment. There is no need to kill me. All right, so in other words, he's using the verse from Jeremiah that says to curse the one who is lazy. And the teacher said, don't use that verse to learn to kill me, but use the verse to just curse me. Yoav said to him, it's also written, and cursed is he who keeps back his sword from blood. Right? So that the same verse, Jeremiah 48:10, says you're not supposed to withhold this punishment. There are those who say that Yoav killed him, and there are those who say that he did not kill him. In any event, this episode demonstrates that an error learned in one's childhood stays with him his whole life. And Rava says, with regard to a teacher of children, a professional tree planter, a butcher, a bloodletter, and a town scribe, all these are considered forewarned. In other words, they need not be exhorted to perform their jobs correctly, as if they err in the performance of their duties, they can be dismissed immediately. The principle of the matter is, with regard to any case where loss is irreversible, the individual is considered forewarned. In other words, you're doing a job that has tremendous consequences on the person, or now the tree planter. What kind of consequences is there for the tree? What the tree planter? Oh, so a professional tree planter. This does not refer to a planter who actually destroys trees, as it's clear that this individual must pay for the damage he caused. Rather, it means one who plants in such a manner that the trees do not grow properly. Although this is irretrievable damage, the owner has no legal claim against the planter, right? In other words, the tree that you're planting is supposed to provide future livelihood, whether it's for lumber or whether it's in an orchard. So if you don't plant the trees well, then it's not going to produce what it's supposed to produce. So the teacher of children is in this category with a butcher, because if a butcher does something wrong, that is, the butcher is also the shochet. So if he shechts wrong, right, you bring your animal to be shechted by the butcher, and the butcher does it wrong, well, that's it. You can't fix it. If it's done wrong, it's treif, and there goes your animal, and that's a lot of money. Or, he didn't check the internal organs afterwards well enough, then he'd be liable for eating treif, or things like that. The bloodletter, so if the bloodletter does something wrong, you can kill or injure somebody. And a town scribe, if you write, I'm just thinking the most important thing a town scribe would do would be a get. And if he writes the get wrong, then that could affect, marital relations, etc. So all these professions, the people who are in those professions understand the importance of their job, and they don't need to be forewarned every time they do their thing. So teacher of children is in the same category, that what you teach can have a lasting effect on children, so you better be sure to teach correctly. The principle of the matter is, with regard to any case where loss is irreversible, the individual is considered forewarned. Okay. On to now another red S. So those are all statements of Rav Huna about teachers. Rav Huna said there was a certain resident of an alleyway who set up a mill. So now we're back to setting up business in a courtyard or an alley. So there was a certain resident of an alleyway who set up a mill in the alleyway and earned his living grinding grain for people. And subsequently, another resident of the alleyway came up and set up a mill next to his. The halacha is that the first one may prevent him from doing so if he wishes, as he can say to him, "You are disrupting my livelihood by taking my customers." Right? You have an alley, so if there's already a business there, a particular kind of business there. You can't set up, and somebody can't come along and set up the exact same business in the same alley. You're just not allowed to do that. You can't take customers away from an already established business. The Gemara suggests, let us say that a Baraita supports his opinion. One must distance fish traps from fish, that is, from other fish traps, as far as the fish travels, that is, the distance from which the fish will travel. The Gemara asks, how much and how much is this distance, right? In other words, like sometimes, I don't know, when you're, I'm first thinking about individual fishermen who are like on a bridge down by the shore, right? You've seen people fishing at the beach or off a bridge, something like that. You got a bunch of people fishing there. Is that allowed to do? Well, if there are enough fish down below in the water, then individual fishermen can be next to each other. But then I wonder about professional fishermen, like who go out on a fishing boat, how far apart do the fishing boats have to be from each other so that each fishing boat can have the chance to bring in a whole boat full of fish and for their livelihood. So fish traps, I'm not sure how these fish traps work, but fish traps. Rashi explains that if a fisherman intends to catch a particular fish, no one else may cast his net in the same place. Others explain that the phrase from fish means from a fish trap. The reason a trap would be referred to as fish is that it was common practice to put one fish in the trap in order to attract other fish. Generally, one does not acquire an item that has not yet entered his possession, and no one who seizes it beforehand is not considered, and one who seizes it beforehand is not considered wicked. Nevertheless, this principle refers only to an item that is available only on occasion. For example, a found item. If one goes fishing near a place where another is already fishing, he is negatively affecting the other's steady livelihood. So, if you're fishing for fun, or for sport, it's one thing. If you're fishing because it's your livelihood, it depends. You're providing food for yourself and maybe for your family. Then you should stay far away to give better opportunity for that person to haul in some fish. So one must distance fish traps from fish. So the Gemara asks, and how much is this distance? Like how far apart can people be to set up fish traps? Rabba bar Rav Huna says up to a parasang, a parsa. This indicates that one must distance himself from the place where another has established his business. So in other words, a parasang, I'm not sure how far a parasang is, but let's say it's a mile. So the fish traps have to be a mile apart. Maybe it's a half mile. I don't know. It's a long way, so that you can hardly even see the other person there. The Gemara responds that this is no proof. So in other words, you can't apply the fish trap ruling here to all other kinds of businesses, right? Should it be a parasang between individual mills or any other kind of business, or can it be less? Perhaps fish are different as they look around. That is, one fish explores the area ahead of the others, indicating to them where to go. Once they encounter the first trap, they will not approach the second. So that's interesting that the rabbis think the fish are smart this way, and that they warn other fish about traps in the area. I don't think fish are smart enough to do that. They could warn each other about sharks being around or something like that. I'm not sure that they warn each other about traps. I don't know about that. That's why. So the idea of fish traps has to be different from other businesses because you're dealing with fish that might warn other fish about the traps. So they have to be enough of a distance away that the fish won't be warned. Ravina said to Rava, shall we say that Rav Huna spoke in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? As we learned in a Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, a storekeeper may not hand out toasted grain and nuts to children who patronize his store due to the fact that he thereby accustoms them to come to him at the expense of competing storekeepers. So that's interesting. If one store does a sale, or it's like Costco that has these tasting stations. So if one store does these tasting stations as kind of bait for customers to want to not only eat that but try to buy that particular item and then maybe buy other items too. Are stores, businesses allowed to do that because it's pulling customers away from other businesses. And the rabbis permit doing so. This indicates that, so in other words, so other stores can do that too. What's preventing them from doing that? If one store is giving out free candy, then other candy stores can give out free candy also. and the rabbis permit doing so. This indicates that according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, all forms of competition are prohibited, which would include the scenario concerning the mill. Right? So the rabbis would permit some level of competition, but it's unclear when it comes to setting up the shop itself, not the retail strategies, but the setting up of the shop. Not sure what the rabbis would say, but in terms of the strategies of the shopkeeper or the business owner, anything goes, and it doesn't. Just because one business is doing it doesn't mean that others can't do it either. Okay, the Gemara rejects this suggestion. You may even say that Rav Huna holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. The rabbis disagree with Rabbi Yehuda only there, as the storekeeper can say to his competitor, if I distribute walnuts, you can distribute almonds. But here, with regard to a resident of an alleyway who sets up a mill in that alleyway where another mill already exists, even the rabbis can see that the owner of the first mill can say to him, you're disrupting my livelihood. As beforehand, whoever required grinding came to me, and you have provided them with another option. Right? So it's one thing for shopkeepers to say, okay, if we're giving out free food, this is what we should do. I have an abundance of walnuts. I'll give out walnuts. You have an abundance of almonds. Why don't you give out almonds? And then that way we could still have a fair share of all the customers. I'll get the customers who like almonds, and then maybe they'll buy something else. You'll get the customers who like walnuts, and maybe they'll buy something else. So just fair distribution of the strategy of giving out free stuff, as opposed to starting from scratch. It is setting up the business in the first place. So setting up in the first place, you're not allowed to set up two of the same business right next to each other, like if one is already there. The Gemara raises an objection from a Baraita. A man may establish a shop alongside the shop of another, and a bathhouse alongside the bathhouse of another, and the other cannot protest because the newcomer can say to him, you operate in your space and I operate in my space. So here's a competing rabbinic statement that these businesses are allowed to be set up. Like somebody can open up a shop that's already there, next to another one that's already there. And if there's a bathhouse there, somebody can open up a bathhouse next door. The Gemara answers, this entire matter is a dispute between Tanaim, between rabbis of the time of the Mishnah, as it's taught in a Braita. The residents of an alleyway can compel one another to agree not to allow among them in that alleyway a tailor, a tanner, a teacher of children, nor any types of craftsmen. They can bar outside craftsmen from plying their trade, in that alleyway, but one cannot compel his neighbor, that is, one who already lives in the alleyway, to refrain from practicing a particular occupation there. Right? So, okay, so this is a different idea. The residents of an alleyway can agree and establish like a homeowners association that prohibits outsiders from coming in and establishing a business there. But the homeowners association cannot prevent someone already in the association from establishing a business. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says one can even compel his neighbor not to conduct such work in the alleyway. Rav Huna holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua, says, it's obvious to me that a resident of one town can prevent a resident of another town from establishing a similar business in the locale of the first individual. But if he pays the tax of that first town, he cannot prevent him from doing business there, as he too is considered a resident of the town. Okay, so that's interesting. So somebody lives in Olney and somebody lives in Brookville. And if somebody in Brookville wants to set up a business in Olney, then you could do it if the Brookville resident pays Olney taxes, right? Or like this, how about someone who commutes to New York City? You have to pay New York City tax because you're working in New York City, right? So the resident of an alleyway cannot prevent a resident of his alleyway from practicing a particular trade there. in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis in the Baraita and contrary to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. With these conclusions in mind, Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua, raises a dilemma. With regard to a resident of one alleyway, protesting about a resident of another alleyway, conducting business there, what is the halacha? No answer was found, and the Gemara states that the dilemma shall stand unresolved. Rav Yosef said, and Rav Huna, who said that a resident of an alleyway can prevent another from setting up an additional mill, concedes with regard to those who teach children that one cannot prevent him from working. As the master said, Ezra instituted an ordinance for the Jewish people requiring that they establish one teacher alongside another teacher to raise the standard of teaching. So you can have competing teachers, and so that kind of competition is okay because it's for the betterment of the spreading of Jewish education. But other businesses, maybe not. So the Gemara challenges, and let us be concerned lest the teachers will thereby come to be negligent. Rav Yosef, right, we're back to that, which we saw on the previous page. If there's competing teachers, maybe one will become negligent. Rav Yosef said to the sage who raised this objection, jealousy among teachers increases wisdom. So in other words, if there's a lot of teachers around, it's going to mean that the teachers want to improve their skills, not the opposite, that some teachers will become lazy. Okay, so I guess we can go on a little bit more. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, and Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua, who said that townspeople can bar craftsmen who come from other cities, concedes with regard to perfume salesmen who travel from one town to another, that the townspeople cannot prevent them from entering their town. As the master said, Ezra instituted an ordinance for the Jewish people that perfume salesmen should travel from town to town so that cosmetics will be available to Jewish women. Since this ordinance was instituted on behalf of Jewish women, the sages ruled that these peddlers cannot be barred from entering the town. So there's this idea too. Everybody wants a nice-looking and nice-smelling woman. The Gemara continues. We'll leave that sexist comment alone. And this matter applies only to one who seeks to travel from town to town as a salesman. But if he wants to establish a shop, this ruling was not stated, and the townspeople can prevent him from doing so. And if he's a Torah scholar, he may even establish a shop as a perfume salesman. Right? So in other words, he's a Torah scholar, but he has to make a livelihood. So then he's allowed to set up a shop. If he's not a Torah scholar and he wants to set up a shop, then he can be prevented from setting up a shop. This is like that incident in which Rava permitted Rabbi Yoshia and Rav Ovadia to establish a shop not in accordance with the halacha. What's the reason for this ruling? The reason is that since they are rabbis, they are likely to be distracted from their studies should they be required to travel from place to place. Okay, so it's 10:19. So let's stop here for today. And next Sunday is the 21st, Erev Rosh Hashanah. So we will have class next Sunday. The following Sunday, the 28th, is our Tashlich program. So we will not have class on the 28th because I'll be going to Lake Needwood, and I hope that you'll be there too for our Tashlich program. So, okay, so see you next Sunday. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Good luck, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.